our goal is shifting a bit. How do we remove her need for an abortion? How do we address that at a much deeper level? How do we engage her in a new way? How do we cut it off before it gets there? So that's where we as Clarity, probably about 2 years ago, we really started contemplating a new model for pregnancy care.
Welcome to Lifeline for Leaders, a podcast created to strengthen and connect those serving in pregnancy care clinics and pro-life ministries. I'm Linda Thomas.
And I'm Kirk Thomas. Each week we sit down with leaders, ministry partners, authors, and experts who shape the pro-life landscape, sharing practical insights you can use right away and inspiring stories that remind you you're not walking this journey alone.
Our mission is to help you serve with confidence and resilience. This is your community, your support, your lifeline.
Today we're joined by Eric Allen, CEO of Clarity of Central Indiana. Eric brings a rather unique leadership background from fighter aircraft production to pastoral ministry and now pregnancy care. He also serves on the board of the Indiana Association of Pregnancy Care Centers. Eric, thanks for joining us on Lifeline for Leaders today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Kirk. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I got to tell you that Clarity has a special place in my heart. It's where I got started, several years ago, just walking into the doors of one of the Clarity offices and asking them about their insurance. And boy, did I not know what God planned for me there, which has been a blessing. And I thank Clarity for changing my career and changing my whole religion as far as my relationship with God. So I am so happy that you're on here today, Eric. As I said in the intro, you've got a very unique career path there from what you've done. I'm gonna call you Top Gun because you were in the fighter pilot or fighter airplane industry. So can you just tell us about what from there to what led you to pro-life ministry?
Yeah, I am a little diverse, and I call it a third career. And honestly, been blessed. None of them were my plan, and that's probably what's even more unique for somebody that kind of plans things a lot of times. But it's just kind of been what God has led to do. And in pastoral ministry for 20 years as a lead pastor, and then just kind of accidentally wandered into CareNet, much like you did. I originally came to an organization, a local pregnancy care group of a couple of centers and a couple of staff members, and then we added another center, and then through happenstance, as God's work, brought that together with Clarity, and those organizations were merged, and I ended up leading the new combined organization with the centers that we had. So I don't know that it was not my plan by any means. The original plan of it was at now 60 years of age, but there was a thought when I was looking for a new ministry opportunity. The merger came along, and they offered me the position. There was a side of me that said, I don't know if I want to work this hard. And I took it thinking, I'm not sure how this is going to go, and it's been phenomenal ever since. It's been reinvigorating, and I've just loved it. So it's an outstanding opportunity to be a part of.
So you mentioned two very good size organizations, and I believe it was CareNet of Central Indiana, right? That was the incorporated name, and then Clarity, which was a good size organization. You brought these two together, and boy, what a powerhouse. Can you just tell us how the cultures blended and how that merger came about and started talking about, and then it actually happened?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. My predecessor at Clarity, just did a phenomenal job for 14 years, who you knew well, Tim, and just had done such an outstanding job. And he was transitioning to an executive pastor role at a church. And I just came out of a church, and been in ministry as a lead pastor for 20 years. And so we were swapping vocations a little bit and caught up that friendship and realized pretty quickly that we could learn from each other just by the different roles that we'd had. And he introduced the potential of our counties that we serve in Indiana are adjacent counties. And so here we are, two organizations doing really the same work with the same heart, and at the same time separately. And so he introduced that question of why aren't we merged together? And so we shared that potential with our boards, who humbly just said, yeah, whatever God wants to do, we'll do. Likewise, just said, let's have this discussion of merger and leave me out of my role in it. That's kind of an inconsequential part of it. You need to decide what God wants for the organizations first. And if I'm a part of that, great. If not, he's got another plan, and I'm not going to worry about that. So they pursued that consideration. The boards did, and came to a conclusion the same as Tim and I had, which was why aren't we just doing this together? Clarity was the larger, with at that time 6 locations, and CareNet then at the merger had 3. And Clarity had really been better developed. I had only been at CareNet for a short time, about 18 months at that time, and they'd done such a good job at Clarity of developing that foundation, the structure, the things, but it had really outgrown itself. It had capped off in its function for the organization. And certainly when the 2 organizations merged together, that structure was totally inadequate, in all aspects of our operation, really. And so we, went from 6 centers to 9, plus an STI clinic. So a total of 10. We had 11 location facilities that we were in fully. So a whole lot of stuff there, moving from just that small amount when you were already on that brink as an organization as Clarity, where you'd capped out at its current size. You add that more, you're really beyond. So it just was a great opportunity for us to come together and share resources. And our boards were just very gracious and very humble about not having pride and saying, oh, this is what we're going to do. It was really more of a, what does God want to do in this? So pleasure to work with.
Yeah. And just for the geography, for the people that don't know, I mean, CareNet of Central Indiana was closer to Indianapolis, where Clarity is down in Columbus, which is a pretty good size, maybe of 50,000 people. I'm sure the abortion numbers were higher up towards Indianapolis than they were maybe down here. Is that correct? I mean, how did you adapt to that, coming to Clarity and then, taking that mission to the CareNet of Central Indiana, locations?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question, because I find, even as a part of the board on the Indiana Association of Pregnancy Centers, that my background in aviation, I'm a little bit of a statistical guy. So I like to know what's going on in those ways, and really led me to start assessing, our effectivity. How is what we're doing addressing the core mission of saving lives? And I really found across the board at CareNet, and certainly at Clarity as well, that while we can serve a lot of clients very often, it does not mean that those clients are always our core mission. It's easy to become a social service agency of providing material support, and those people need that, but it's also very easy to not actually be reaching any abortion-seeking women, even though they're in your community. And so that's where we really address that pretty strongly. A large percentage of the pregnancy centers in Indiana, and Clarity and CareNet were amongst those, serve a very low percentage of clients that are abortion-minded and determined. And when I say very low, I mean less than 5%. And so you think how many funds are going into this effort, when only about, sometimes 1 or 2% or even 5% of those that you're serving, the thousands being served, are actually the core mission of why we exist. And so we began that shift in really looking at each counties. We have locations now in 7 counties south of Indianapolis, for context. And we started looking also at per capita rates, abortion rates. It's easy to fall into this category where you're looking at the sheer large numbers, but how about the numbers per population? Where does that fall in? And sometimes you find that some larger communities really don't have that high of an abortion rate per capita. There's just a lot of people there. And so, Johnson County, which is one that is a border county of Indianapolis, we found it was the 4th highest rate per capita in the state of Indiana. And so that was one of those where we now have 2 centers in that county for that reason. And some of our other counties were not very high at all. They were extremely low. Some of the lowest, one in particular was the lowest in the state. And since then, we've closed that particular location because we looked at the funding and said, we're pouring funds into a place where every life does matter, but at the same time, we have that many abortions in another county in a week that location has in a year. And so, those are the things where we became much more strategic in working on maximizing our resources and pouring into locations. And still today, I hear of organizations that contact me and say, hey, we're looking at adding a location in this area. Can you give us any tips? And yeah, have you looked at your abortion rate there, your per capita rate? Is that your goal, or are you just interested in doing material support and care, which is great in itself if that's their mission, but it's that need to rethink that sometimes.
Yeah. Clarity is a little unique in that it's got, its own STI clinic,
Yeah.
separate from the other locations. Can you tell us a little bit about those, how that developed, and, the success that's led to people finding clarity?
Yeah, it's really interesting. When I came to Clarity, we had one STI clinic out of Columbus, Indiana, in our headquarter county and city. We now have 4 locations. We've again looked at where the abortion rates are and the need and client load that is there, and really define that a little bit more. To me, it's that question of why are we doing STI and treatment? And it's easy again to fall into we do this for sexual health. But is that our game? Is that really our mission? And so the STI testing and treatment for us is focused on engaging a population that is at risk of causing or experiencing an unwanted pregnancy. And that is different than just providing sexual health. It goes back to that unplanned pregnancy. If we look at about half the pregnancies in the United States being unplanned, and not far from half, somewhere around 46%, I've seen that are of unplanned pregnancies in an abortion. Then we start saying, okay, wait a minute, the unplanned pregnancy that can become unwanted very quickly can become an issue. And how do we engage that population in our STI treatment areas that are at risk of being there? So how do we just not be reactive? And how do we start actually trying to engage a population that is at high risk of being in that abortion section?
And then also you've really got a very well developed program for reaching children in the schools. I mean, elementary to middle school to high school, which my son went through that program. And, I just can't say enough about the impact that's having on our students in the Columbus and other areas, school areas.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. It's an I decide for me curriculum that we authored over years, and it continues to be a part of a grant that also is researched through evidence substantiated then each year through our outcomes measurements and things, and improve. But we do somewhere between 6,200 to 7,200 students per year in the public schools primarily, and some private schools. But that's also carried out through a federal grant, and it doesn't restrict us. Public schools themselves have criteria of what someone can come into their school with material-wise, and so we're using principles that are the same as biblical principles in many cases, but we're just not utilizing the Jesus name publicly in it, but still able to teach those underlying foundations. And that is, by authoring that, it's a prevention side of what we do. Our 3 ministry areas of prevention, intervention, or our care centers, and then restoration. And we also sell that curriculum for a very affordable price that we don't make a lot of money off of to help support that initiative in other organizations. So not a sales pitch there, but then we train those, and they're able to carry that out in their own school systems. So overall, we're in about 60 schools, 25 school systems ourselves, and then our curriculum colleagues double that with another about 6,000 to 7,000 students each year, and combined, God's blessed us to be one of the largest pro-life educators in the state through that. So it's abstinence. It's also a sexual risk avoidance, and that gets into details. Our education staff are more in tune with the differences between sexual risk avoidance besides reduction. And so an abstinence-based program, it's an excellent job.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is that when you came aboard, you kind of moved away from the traditional fundraisers that pregnancy care clinics had, and you moved to maybe more donor appreciation nights and different things like that. Can you explain to our listeners how you plan that and your motivation behind that, and so that maybe that might help some other centers?
Sure. Yeah, it is a different, some level of that is again through analysis of looking at what's really going on. At that time, because we're spread over a fairly large geographic area in Indiana, because so many of our counties are rural, as Kirk would know, we have about an hour and a half between our furthest locations apart. And for a large organization that's covering multiple states like some are, that's not so much, but sometimes there's no easy way from point A to B. And we have to have banquets then. At that time, we were doing 7 to 8 banquets every year in about a 6-week time span. So very intense. And by all measures, most people would say they were successful in the nonprofit world in that our gross amount, our number of attendees, 22 to 2,500 attendees for our banquets, and similar with a golf outing, you were probably a part of 250 or so people coming to it. But in the merger, we really ran into something unique that made me aware of the challenge that was there. And that our merger really wasn't, the marketing part didn't go well. It just didn't happen really. It wasn't carried out and executed very well, but I knew our marketing staff was busy all the time, really working hard, just a phenomenal staff there, but just couldn't seem to get to what they needed to. And in really inquiring, it tipped us off to some challenges. And that was when asking where are we spending our marketing time, they indicated 90% of our marketing was being spent on our events and only about 10% to our clients. That really led to, okay, how effective are these for us, which made us question what our return was on it. When you start looking at events, nonprofits are really famous for advertising the gross of their event on how successful it was rather than the net. And the net, then, when they do look at it, we have a habit of looking at just the hard costs, like what did it cost for the caterer? What did it cost for the venue? And if you're going to get a good attendance, really pull a good event off like Clarity did, you really have to invest some money in it. You have to do great videography work in it, put a program together, but your staff has to work. And so we started pre-planning all of our things at least 8 months in advance. And that becomes a challenge when you realize at some point the question comes, are we an event ministry versus a pregnancy care ministry? Do we do events so that we can fund our pregnancy care, or is just pregnancy care kind of the focus of our events? So it's a quandary of that. It really stretched our staff very thin for months and months to come. And so in a way, those events owned us a little bit. And you're on the rat race of the, the wheel of the gerbil that you can't get off of. And so that was that shift that came into play of us reassessing that and realizing that after we counted all of our staff costs that were going into these, our profit margin was much thinner than we thought. And really, it was only about what we were able to get from one strong sponsor for that event. So we could do these events and involve all of our staff and distract our focus from what we exist to do, and have a return of about what one person giving really strongly could do, or we could really shift our focus. We also looked at analyzing what are our givers at our events giving, and we realized that 80% of our attendees at the events were only given 20% of the money. The 20% were given the 80% of the funds, just like any church or anything typical for us. And so that began to say, is there a different way to do these things? And can we focus on the 20% more intently? Can we build relationships? Also, as a pastor for many years, I would tell you, I love being on stage. It's where I feel at home, right? My gift set is to get on and have fun and enjoy presenting and challenging. So it goes against my nature to not do that. But we really recognized some challenges with it, that it was a one-way communication. Now, it had its advantages of building community and excitement and those kind of things, no doubt, that are there in connection. But we shifted then to shifting just towards donor engagement on a personal level. So very different in that, moved totally away from events. Don't know that we executed that really that well. We probably should have put that off another year after the merger because too many things were going on at one time. We had a merger, change of the CEO position I was between myself and Tim. There were two, so 4 people within about a year and a half changes. So some of those challenges we probably should have put off longer and had a better executed plan to really maximize that. But in reality, it's a few years later, it's doing fairly well. And we really, with the amount of client loads, with the legislative changes that have taken on in Indiana, we look back and we don't see how we could have ever done events in the time frame that we're doing now with the staff that we're doing it with. So it's been a good shift. Yeah.
Well, and it just goes along. We had a guest, Haley Limo, who's a fundraising coach, and the first thing that she asks a leader or executive director at a center is, "Are you a fundraiser or are you an event planner?" And you know, getting down to the answers of that question. So, real quickly, you mentioned about the legislative changes that in 2022 that Indiana implemented. So, what real quick, what challenges have those brought about to a pro-life ministry here?
Oh my! I would say they have been a COVID level impact on the pro-life ministry, though I don't think all of our organizations realize it yet. But what took place is, I would venture to say that prior to legislative change, and this is not to say that legislative changes weren't needed, right? But it's just looking at the impact of it. Prior to the legislative change, we had a couple of weeks to engage a young lady. She had to, that was considering or pursuing an abortion. She had to get an appointment at a center, an organization that would provide an abortion. She had to, in Indiana, ultrasounds were required, so she had to go get an ultrasound appointment there. And sometimes we could engage her by getting her in an ultrasound before they could schedule her. So some of those logistic things. And then she had to get the appointment for the abortion. Well, as Kirk probably knows, and many of your listeners know, the other side is often ahead of the game. And so the launching of the online sale of abortion pills for medicated abortions launched before the law even changed in Indiana. And what has resulted is, for us in Indiana, is that abortion is more available than it's ever been. We would estimate that rather than 2 or 3 weeks to engage this young lady, we now have a few hours, because she can just get online and Google for abortion, and the providers show up, and she can click and nobody knows. She can get those pills in a matter of a couple days and nobody knows. And so there's no shame. The shame is reduced so significantly, and the secrecy is increased so significantly, that in our area of Indiana, at least, that is the way of abortion today. And those that are on state lines in areas where they're close to a abortion providing state, that changes a bit, I think. But for us, where we're at, where it's an hour and a half, 2 hours to the state line, the pills are the way. Just order online, and it's really impossible to stop that, because you can't open every piece of mail that comes into Indiana or any state. As well as we've realized that they're not all legitimate pill providers. So going after a prescriber, for instance, doesn't necessarily solve that dilemma, because we have contacts from young ladies that say, "I got these pills in a plain envelope. There's no information. Are they okay to take?" Well, no.
Right.
You don't even know what they are. But it speaks to the
Exactly.
reality. There's just money to be made here. It doesn't mean that they're legitimate providers, legitimate pills. There's just money to be made. And so that's really the challenge of that. And we've realized, too, that legislation doesn't take away the fear this young lady has experienced or is experiencing. So our goal is shifting a bit. How do we remove her need for an abortion? How do we address that at a much deeper level? How do we engage her in a new way? How do we cut it off before it gets there? So that's where we, as Clarity, probably about 2 years ago, we really started contemplating a new model for pregnancy care that is really about how do we address root cause issues, meaning what are the things in these lives that keep individuals engaged in behaviors that are risky sexual behaviors that put them at risk of unplanned pregnancy. STIs, we have repeat. They come back every few months or 3 months or multiple times per year for an STI test. What is it in their life that makes them in a situation they feel like they have to have these encounters, even at risk, that they know is there? And so we've been working the last year and a half on that model of assessing for root causes. We're in the process of starting to train our staff to build an assessment culture of our staff, so that we're looking at and considering what some root causes are. And then we'll begin building a kind of what we call a roadmap of care to start trying to move them into that. And so that's been a big change for us. Online marketing, the online sale of the pills shifted our understanding how crucial that was. And so by pouring funds into that, we interact now with more abortion-seeking women than we've ever done in our history. And that's a new animal that we're trying to learn all itself, in the sense of engagement with those young ladies. When they message us, how is the customer experience so that we can move them from that first text from our ad that they're texting with our staff to moving them to a phone call. How do we get that show up rate to happen for the appointments, which are more prone to show up? We found that telephone versus texting, we get to make that call, they're more prone to show up for that appointment. So all those things are new things. I would say just from involvement as an Indiana Association board member of pregnancy centers, I still see that a large percentage of organizations really are not investing at all in online marketing. And as a result, they're really not engaging the population in their communities that are considering abortion today. While we sound like a larger organization, in reality, it doesn't matter your size, budget's always a challenge. And we're pouring about $1,000 a week into that, and that's really the minimum of what we need to be pouring into it. But it's really where we're at. But every week we have multiple engagements in our region.
Eric, you've provided some awesome information. I just want to comment that everybody thought when Roe versus Wade got overturned that it was going to be easier for pregnancy care clinics, but it's not. And pregnancy care clinics need our support. Both financially and stepping up and maybe volunteering some time for the pregnancy care centers. So the last question, what's a lifeline that you can give our listeners? Just one little nugget of information that you've learned that can be important that they can use right now.
Yeah, it's a good question. Something that we did is these legislative challenges made us realize how significant the battle is. It's a spiritual battle. And so this year we launched what we call an urgent prayer text system, where our staff, when they're engaging with a young lady that's considering abortion, wants an abortion, that they can text out a prayer request, because we realized our staff cannot win this alone. And so we went from about 30 people signed up for that at the beginning of the year. Right now we have 700 that receive that text every time it's sent out from our staff. And our goal by the end of the year is 2,000. More than 2,000 people signed up. And I got to tell you, the impact of that for our staff, but also for those receiving it consistently, even our board members initially had the same response. People in the churches that have signed up have had the same response, and that response has been, we had no idea. And so that is worth it.
Now, just real quick, if there's some listeners that just love what you said, maybe want to pick your brain for a minute, is there an email that they can maybe reach out to you, Eric, and just say, hey, I'm a new director, or we're going through this, could you maybe share that?
Yeah, CEO@claritycares.org.
Well, God put the right person in the leadership role at Clarity, and all people that are there. And we appreciate you stepping into that role and taking charge. So, and for all of our listeners, keep leading with courage and compassion.
Thanks for joining us today on Lifeline for Leaders. If today's episode was meaningful, feel free to share it with someone who might benefit. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a conversation.
Remember, you don't have to walk this mission alone. We're honored to walk alongside you.
See you next time.